All right, today we're going to dive into a really powerful, but honestly often overlooked story from the Book of Two Kings. It's all about a woman who, get this, is never even given a name. But her actions, well, they speak volumes about faith and true determination. So, we're going to explore this exact question through the story of this remarkable woman from a place called Shunem. Her journey, you'll see, really challenges our assumptions about the ancient world and reveals a model of faith that feels, well, incredibly relevant, even today. So, let's meet our main character. The story doesn't start with her name. It starts with her character and her status. She's described simply as a great woman, a wealthy woman. And as we're about to see, that description is a huge understatement. Okay, so let's just tear down some common stereotypes right away. According to Dr. John Oswalt, whose analysis we're drawing from, this woman completely shatters the mold. She is not a possession of her husband, she is competent, she's wealthy, and frankly, her husband is kind of just in the background. She is the one driving the action here. Context is absolutely key. When we look at the biblical texts compared to the cultures around them at the time, you find these stories that give women a level of value and position that was, well, it was nothing short of revolutionary. And this woman from Shunem, she's a perfect example of that. So let's get to the first major event in her story. It all starts with an encounter. There's a prophet named Elisha who's regularly passing through her town. She just watches him and then she makes this declaration to her husband. And it's a statement of absolute certainty. She doesn't just think he might be a good person. She says, I know he's a holy man of God. And that's such a fascinating question, right? The story doesn't say he performed any miracles or gave any big prophecies for her at this point. So, what was it? How could she be so incredibly sure? Dr. Oswalt has a great term for this, spiritual perception. See, she didn't need some flashy sign. She recognized something in his very character, his behavior, what Dr. Oswalt calls a flavor or a scent of life. It was unmistakable. She just sensed his connection to the divine by who he was. So, because she's so hospitable, she actually builds him a little room on her roof. Elisha wants to do something for her in return. And this brings us to the first big problem and the first big promise of the whole story. We have to try and wrap our heads around the immense pressure of being childless in her world. I mean, it wasn't just a personal sadness. It was seen as a complete societal failure. It meant your family line just ended. And this deep cultural anxiety is exactly what drove so many people to worship fertility gods, hoping they could somehow manipulate the divine into giving them a child. And that really gets to the heart of this story's theme. The religions all around them offered ways to try and control the gods. But this narrative presents a totally different path. You can't manipulate God, but you can trust him as the true source of all life. So after his servant Gehazi points out that she doesn't have a son and her husband is old, Elisha makes this just stunning, miraculous promise. He offers her the one thing she needs most but would never even dare to ask for. But her response, it's not joy, it's skepticism. Don't get my hopes up. Now, this isn't a lack of faith, not at all. It's the brutally honest reply of someone who knows that, humanly speaking, what he just said is completely and utterly impossible. But the miracle happens. The child is born, he grows up, and then the story takes this absolutely devastating turn. We're now moving into the central crisis. The unthinkable happens. The child, most likely suffering from a sunstroke, cries out about a pain in his head, and he's carried to his mother, where he dies, right there in her arms. That impossible gift has been tragically ripped away. But just look at what she does next. She doesn't collapse, she doesn't hesitate, she takes immediate, decisive action. She lays her son on Elisha's bed, shuts the door, calls for a donkey, and tells her servant, let's go, and don't you dare slow down. This is faith in motion. Dr. Oswalt suggests her mindset was basically this: if I can just get to that guy, it's gonna be all right. Her faith is so focused, it's relentless. She knows who the source of the miracle was, and she is going straight back to that source. No detours. And this brings us to the climax of the story. Her desperate race to find the prophet and the unbelievable miracle that follows. When she finally gets to Elisha, she just brushes past his servant and falls at his feet. And her words, They're this raw mix of grief, accusation, and this desperate, clinging faith. She's reminding him of the promise, of the hope he gave her, that has now just been shattered into a million pieces. So first, Elisha sends his servant ahead with his staff, kind of like a magical object to place on the boy. But it doesn't work, and that's the whole point. Life isn't restored by some second-hand object or a magic trick. No, it takes Elisha himself, the one who is the conduit of God's power, to go and personally bring that boy back to life.
So, what does this incredible ancient story really mean for us? Let's break down the key takeaways. At its very core, this story is a polemic. It's designed to show one thing as clearly as possible. The God of Israel, Yahweh, is the true source of life and is even powerful enough to restore it. The fertility gods of the culture around them, like Baal, are ultimately failures. They can't deliver on their promises. But wow, this story teaches us so much more. It shows us a woman with incredible agency and power. It suggests that real holiness isn't just about flashy signs. It's something you can sense in a person's character. It defines faith not as a feeling, but as taking decisive action. And maybe most powerfully, it shows that the one who gives life is also the one who can restore it. This nameless woman from some ancient village gives us this timeless model of perception, action, and just fierce faith. And it really leaves us with one final thought, doesn't it? Where else in our world, in our history, or maybe even in ourselves, do we find this kind of profound strength? In places we've been taught not to look.